morning. We're coming to you live from Mission Control Houston, but this is a live look on the other side of the world at the HTV Flight Control Room located over in Tsukuba, Japan, where a team of flight controllers from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency are overseeing the systems on board the Japanese HTV cargo vehicle, which as of this very moment is sitting perched on the end of the space station's robotic arm, about to be released to begin its flight away from the International Space Station and bring a conclusion to this mission. I'm NASA's Dan Hewitt, and I'll be taking you through the events this morning. As I said, the HTV craft currently held in the grasp of the station's Canadarm2 robotic arm. The view's a little dark right here, but this is a live view from the International Space Station of that robotic arm, which is grappled to the HTV cargo craft. The International Space Station currently flying just over the eastern coast of China. It's in an orbital nighttime, so it's on the side of the planet that's at night right now, but we'll see the sunrise just shortly before the release is scheduled to happen. Get some light on the vehicle before it flies away. That release is targeted to come at 10:50 a.m. Central Time, 11:50 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, and two crew members on board the International Space Station are standing by in the space station's cupola module at the robotics workstation. They're going to be there all morning until they actually release this vehicle. It's going to be European astronaut and current space station Commander Alex Gerst at the control, pressing the button to send HTV on its way. He's going to be backed up by NASA astronaut Serena Aunon-Chancellor. We'll be hearing her voice talking back and forth with the team down here on the ground as they're going through all of the operations today. And some of the folks that she's going to be talking to here in Houston, who are also helping out overseeing the operations on board the station to actually release this vehicle. This is a live view inside of the station flight control room. The Orbit 2 team currently on console monitoring all of the various systems. They are being led today in the room by the flight director, Zeb Scoville. Again, he's going to be overseeing the teams, and he's going to be doing his go, no-go poll for this release very shortly. And then you're going to be hearing Serena talking back and forth with the Capcom today, Alex Kanalekos, who's going to be serving as that voice communication link between the teams here in Houston and the crew on board. That's Alex in the blue shirt and the blue tie right there at the top of your screen, and just below him is Zeb Scoville. So again, the planned release time today is 10:50 a.m. Central Time, 11:50 a.m. Eastern Time. That release time to coincide with when they have good lighting conditions on the vehicle. So again, once the sun comes up and they're able to get a good view of the craft as it gets released and then ultimately flies away from the International Space Station, the vehicle will execute a series of burns or firings of the engines on board to carry it away from the station, eventually moving out of what's known as the keep-out sphere, which is an imaginary sphere around the International Space Station with a range of about 200 meters. And that's just used to govern what vehicles are allowed to come and go from the space station and what kind of checks they have to do whenever they're doing those operations. Once HTV is released, though, and it flies away from the station, it's going to begin a several-day flight until it ultimately re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. HTV not designed to survive the fiery reentry that's built up by all of the intense forces of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere at thousands of miles an hour. So it will ultimately burn up, all of the spacecraft and the cargo inside being incinerated hundreds of miles above us. However, there's a special capsule on HTV that's going to be making the ride home, and that is known as the HTV Small Reentry Capsule. And this is a first-time technology demonstration from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency to try and return samples from the International Space Station back down to the ground. In this graphic, you can see where the small capsule, it's known as the HSRC, is going to be located on the HTV cargo craft. It's already been installed, assembled and installed by the crew on board. It's a fairly small capsule, diameter 2.7 feet, height 2.1 feet, weighing in at just under 400 pounds. But inside, are experiment samples. So samples from an experiment that was conducted on board the International Space Station. The ones for this test mission are actually from a protein crystal growth experiment from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. Currently returning samples from the International Space Station, you need a craft that can survive that reentry, which the only spacecraft currently rated to do that are SpaceX's Dragon and the Russian Soyuz spacecraft, which returns crew back down to the planet and also has a small amount of capability to return cargo. So this would be a
HTV release on time, step 5 to 6.2 in procedure 1.420.
Go for HTV release on time, step 5 to 6.2 and 1.420.
Good read.
And so just there we heard the Capcom Alex Yanalekos give Serena Aunon-Chancellor the go to release HTV on time. So the teams on here, down here on Earth, both in Houston and overseeing the HTV vehicle out in Japan, ready to go for this release. Again, it's going to be Alex Gerst, the current station commander at the controls there at the robotics workstation, who's actually going to command the arm to release the vehicle. And you're going to be hearing Serena Aunon-Chancellor. She's in the cupola with him, backing him up and helping to coordinate things with the team down here in Houston. So right now we are go for that release. Again, that's scheduled to come at 10:50 a.m. Central Time, 11:50 a.m. Eastern. Back to our experiment return capsule, though. Again, so as was just described, this is a pretty rare capability right now in terms of being able to return samples from the station back down to Earth. Only 2 vehicles currently with that, the ability to do that. So the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency testing this device on this mission. It's been packed with experiment samples on board, and the capsule was actually constructed and put in place by the crew over the last couple of days. So inside there's a small container that's vacuum sealed, and they're able to either keep it hot or cold using some insulation inside, actually using ice packs for these samples in particular. It's been installed, and it's going to be released from HTV just prior to that reentry. So that reentry right now is targeted to come on Saturday, November 10th. So right after HTV does its final deorbit maneuvers, so firing its engines to change the angle to actually dip down and begin re-entering through the Earth's atmosphere, it will release that capsule, which will fall down on its own accord using a heat shield to survive the fiery heat of reentry, ultimately deploying a number of parachutes and splashing down in the ocean, where it will get picked up by a recovery ship from Japanese search and recovery forces. So a pretty cool experiment being done on this cargo mission today. That's going to be testing that capability to bring more experiment samples home and just add another unique capability for getting science off the station and the results back down to the scientists here on planet Earth, where they do all of the analysis and are able to make those breakthroughs and learn what we've been doing on board this orbiting laboratory. Aside from that, the HTV spacecraft is packed full of about 2 tons of trash and other items that were marked for disposal that will again be incinerated once it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere and burns up during that re-entry. HTV actually delivered just over 5 tons of cargo to the International Space Station, though. The spacecraft launched back in September. Flying up from the Tanegashima Space Center in southern Japan, launching on September 22nd. Then it arrived at the station just 5 days later on the 27th, being grappled by the same robotic arm that we're looking at right now, and then ultimately attached to the International Space Station, where it's been ever since. So that was just about 45 days ago since its first launch. And since arriving, it's been attached to the Harmony module on board the International Space Station. It's also referred to as Node 2. And it's attached in place, so we call it berthed, and there's a series of bolts holding the spacecraft in place while it's attached to the station. And over the last several weeks, the last month and a half actually, the crew's been responsible for unloading, again, the little over 5 tons of cargo that came up on the HTV spacecraft. Things ranging from crew supplies, even getting some fresh fruit for the crew on board this spacecraft once it first arrived. Thousands of pounds of experiment hardware, vehicle spares, other items just necessary to keep the station up and running, and again, resupplying all those scientific experiments on board. And aside from all of that cargo inside the vehicle, it also delivered batteries, new batteries on an exposed pallet. This is the second time now that an HTV spacecraft delivered these batteries, and this is a sped up view of those batteries being extracted back on September 28th, so actually right after the vehicle arrived. In there, the batteries themselves are those squared parts you can see on the right side. It's on something called an exposed pallet, and those are lithium-ion batteries that are bound to be installed on the external part of the International Space Station. The space station, as you know, generates all of its electricity from the massive solar panels that you can see one swinging just out of view in the bottom left of your screen there. Those solar panels, anytime the stations on the side of the planet where the sun is shining, are generating that electricity. That electricity also gets sent directly to station systems, but all of the excess gets stored in batteries like these. That pallet is right now stowed on something called a POA. That's a fun acronym within an acronym, as we like to call it. It's a POA, it's a payload and ORU accommodation. ORU is another acronym standing for Orbital Replacement Unit. So basically, it's just a temporary storage point where all of those batteries are stored for the time being. 6 batteries in all. Again, they're lithium ion, and they will ultimately replace 6 nickel hydrogen batteries on the outside of the station, which have been used over the last decade or so to store energy for station systems. These new lithium ion batteries having a higher capacity, also coming in at a much lower weight. And a higher reliability, so they'll be swapped out during a series of spacewalks originally slated to take place following HTV's arrival, but kind of due to how the schedule of everything lined up, those spacewalks currently TBD. In the future, they'll be assigned at a little bit later date as things kind of calm down a little bit for the space station and all of the demands on the crew time. But those will ultimately be installed through a series of robotic operations and 2 spacewalks at a minimum by crew members to go out and install some adapter plates, which those lithium-ion batteries will ultimately reside on, and then the old nickel hydrogen batteries will get swapped in to that stowage pallet, and they will ultimately just stay on the outside of the International Space Station and potentially be discarded to burn up in the atmosphere in the future. For now, though, it's 10:43 a.m. Central Time, and again, that target release is at 10:50 a.m. Central Time, 11:50 a.m. Eastern Time. In just a couple of minutes, we'll see the sun start to rise in the next minute or so, so we should see things start to light up in some of our external views. This camera view you're looking at right now is actually a camera inside of that cupola module. The cupola, for those who aren't familiar, is the large 360-degree field of view window on the Earth-facing side of the Tranquility module, and it's used primarily for robotics activities like this, as it gives a great view for these crew members of any visiting spacecraft and the robotic arm itself. So it has a robotics workstation where they can actually control the robotic arm, as they'll be doing today with Alexander Gerst at the controls and Serena Aunon-Chancellor backing him up. They also use the cupola for a lot of Earth observations, as it does give that pretty spectacular view of planet Earth. But you can see the sun starting to rise, things starting to light up on the robotic arm and the HTV spacecraft, as the International Space Station is flying into this sunrise. Right now it's just to the south of the Aleutian Islands, flying over the northern Pacific Ocean. And it's going to continue to swing around, eventually heading to the southeast, moving out over the western coast of the United States and Baja California, and ultimately down past Central America and over the western coast of South America. Again, for now, we're standing by. The release window will open up at 10:50 a.m. Central Time, so we'll start to hear some chatter between today's Capcom, Alex Kanalekos, and the crew on board. And then it's up to the crew to ultimately release the spacecraft. So in this view, we're looking at the robotic arm, the Canadarm2. And at the upper right of your screen, you can actually see the HTV spacecraft now that the sun's starting to come up. It's in the grasp of that robotic arm. It's been held by the robotic arm for the last several hours. The hatches were closed up and all the final cargo was loaded in yesterday. And then the vehicle was ultimately unberthed or detached from the Harmony module earlier this morning, just a little over 5 hours ago. And then since then, robotics controllers on the ground actually were in control of the arm, maneuvering the vehicle very slowly to this release point, or its release position, and then control gets handed over to the crew on board, who can make kind of those better real-time decisions with a much more close-up view of the vehicle and the arm in real time. And so now control is in the hands of the crew on board, and it's going to be Expedition 57 Commander Alexander Gerst from the European Space Agency, who's going to be kind of at the controls, pressing the button, if you will, to release HTV this morning. And he's being backed up by Serena Aunon-Chancellor, the NASA astronaut. And you'll likely hear her talking directly to the Capcom down here in Houston today. So activity will pick up in the next couple of minutes. The crew already got the go to proceed with the release on time, which is just about 2 minutes from now. And in this view, you can see, again, we are in that orbital sunrise, so the station now flying over the lit part of the planet as the clouds below, and you're going to be seeing a lot of ocean as well as it's flying over the northern Pacific, now come into view. And just as a reminder, assuming an on-time release today in about a minute and a half, HTV will execute a series of burns or firings of its engine to fly away from the station, ultimately executing a number of different firings of its engine over the next several days to gradually lower its altitude, currently about 254 statute miles over the Earth, until it ultimately re-enters the Earth's atmosphere on Saturday, November 10th. The HTV spacecraft itself burning up upon re-entry, but the small HTV re-entry capsule at the end of the HTV spacecraft will be detached just after that final deorbit maneuver and before that re-entry, and will make its own flight down, ultimately splashing down and getting recovered by Japanese search and recovery forces in the ocean. Now we should be just about 30 seconds from the opening of the release window. So at this point, the release window is open. Standing by to see that release commanded. And again, just standing by, the release window now open for HTV. Should start to see it release, getting the call that the snares are now open. And after the command is given, it does take about a minute or so for all of the components to drive and the arm to actually release the spacecraft. And release. The HTV spacecraft released by the robotic arm, 10:51 a.m. Central Time, 11:51 a.m. Eastern Time. So the station and now HTV are flying just 254 statute miles over the northern Pacific Ocean. So with HTV release, the crew backing the station's arm away from the vehicle. Once it gets into its final park position, they'll get the go for HTV to begin executing its departure maneuvers, so actually firings of the engine. Getting a great view from this camera. This is right on the end of that robotic arm which just released the spacecraft. The dark sections of the vehicle are solar panels used to power HTV systems while in flight.
Houston Station on 2, HTV retreat has been commanded and PET timer started.
Copy.
So again, the HTV spacecraft has been released by the robotic arm. That release coming at 10:51 a.m. Central Time, 11:51 a.m. Eastern, while the station was flying 254 statute miles over the northern Pacific. At this point, the crew on board, Alexander Gerst at the controls, has backed the robotic arm away from the vehicle. And shortly we'll see HTV get the go to begin its departure. You'll see it start slowly moving away from the International Space Station. So we got a great view here. You can see HTV still kind of hovering close to the station. It's been released, the arm backing away. The flight controllers over in Tsukuba, Japan, now going to be in control of the HTV spacecraft. They'll be arming its thrusters and begin commanding it to fly away from the International Space Station.
Station Houston, safety net enabled.
Copy.
And so for now, HTV still just kind of hovering close to the station following that release. We should see that first burn or firing of the engines executed in just about a minute, and then we'll see the spacecraft start to leave the neighborhood of the International Space Station.
Station Houston, IDM-1 maneuver loaded. Monitor per step 2 in 1.602.
Station copies. Step 2.
And as you just heard the Capcom Alex Canalecos call up to the crew, IDM-1 is loaded. IDM stands for the ISS departure maneuver. So again, that'll be that first firing of the thrusters on the tail end of the HTV spacecraft, which are on the left side of it, pointing towards the top left of your screen. And that'll begin maneuvering the uncrewed cargo craft away from the International Space Station.
Station Houston, IDM-1 maneuver complete. Verify per step 3 in 1.602.
Station copies. Step 3. And everything is verified.
Copy. 2 minutes to a handover.
We copy.
And so that first burn completed successfully. The first one, a very short one, targeted to last only 2 seconds, just really altering the relative speed of the spacecraft to the station very slightly, typically less than 0.04 meters per second actually. So we are going to slowly see that gap between the HTV and the station start to widen. And then another burn coming up in just a couple of minutes. It'll be IDM-2. So again, that ISS departure maneuver number 2 will be a little bit longer, lasting about 10 seconds, and that'll add some more speed and start getting HTV away from the station. But again, the release came just inside the release window, coming at 10:51 a.m. Central Time, 11:51 a.m. Eastern Time. HTV packed with a little over 2 tons of trash and other disposable items, ready to begin heading towards the end of its mission. Also on the very front end of the vehicle, that HTV small re-entry capsule, which is going to be poised for its own reentry just before the larger spacecraft burns up in the Earth's atmosphere, delivering some samples hopefully back down to planet Earth, splashing down in the ocean under a parachute-assisted landing, and then getting recovered by Japanese recovery forces on a recovery ship. So for now, everything going very smoothly with the release of the spacecraft. We do have a quick, it's known as a handover, so handing over between the satellites that provide us all the video and audio communication with the space station. So we'll resume that coverage very quickly. But for now, the teams here in Mission Control Houston following along and working in tandem with their counterparts half a world away in Tsukuba, Japan, where they're going to be overseeing HTV through all of the final phases of its flight. But everything looking good so far this morning, and we'll continue to stand by until HTV begins making its way well away from the International Space Station.
Station Houston, no response required. Serena, we're going to delay your PMC for a few minutes until we're finished with the integrated ops.
No problem, Houston.
So again, we're just continuing to stand by. This is a live view over in the HTV flight control room over in Tsukuba, Japan, where flight controllers from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, who have been responsible for overseeing HTV ever since its launch back in September, launching from Tanegashima in Japan on September 22nd and arriving at the station on September 27th. They're now going to be in control of the vehicle, which you can see moving even further away. And again, that next firing of the engine should come in the next 4 to 5 minutes or so, and then we'll begin to see HTV really begin to fly away from the International Space Station. We'll keep with it until it's just outside of what's known as that keep-out sphere, an imaginary sphere around the station of about 200 meters in diameter. That just governs 200 meters in radius, actually, but that just governs vehicles coming to and from the station. And so again, we'll stick with views of the vehicle until it's outside of there. But for now, HTV flying free, released from the robotic arm at 10:51 a.m. Central Time, 11:51 a.m. Eastern Time, while the station was about 254 statute miles over the northern Pacific Ocean. HTV's packed up with about a little over 2 tons of trash and other disposable items that will get burned up along with the craft when it makes that destructive reentry through the Earth's atmosphere, currently targeted to come on Saturday, November 10th. The vehicle, which delivered over 5 tons of cargo, hardware, and experiment supplies and crew supplies to the International Space Station, about to come to the end of a very successful mission. For now, though, both vehicles flying still over the Pacific. Right now, they're just off to the west of Costa Rica, and about to move in much closer to South America, eventually swinging out just over top of Chile and Argentina before crossing over to the Atlantic. And getting word.
Houston, IDM-2, maneuver loaded. Monitor per step 4 in 1.602.
Station copies, and we can verify T minus is counting down and VGO in step 4.
Copy.
And so the second departure maneuver has been loaded onto the vehicle. That's what the conversation between the Capcom here and Serena Aunon-Chancellor on board were just discussing. So any moment now we should hear that maneuver has been executed. It'll be about a 10-second firing of engines on HTV, which will begin sending it away from the International Space Station.
Houston Station on 2, we can verify step 5.
Copy, step 5.
And so getting confirmation now that the second burn has been done successfully. So now the vehicle going to begin exiting the area around the station. So that's both departure maneuvers done successfully. And HTV now going to begin flying. We'll see it move a little bit quicker now, but everything very gradual and deliberate with spacecraft. But for now, HTV on its way away.
Moving out of the keep-out sphere of the ISS. The Expedition 57 crew would like to thank the entire JAXA program and engineering teams for the flawless design and execution of the HTV-7 resupply mission. The contribution of such a well-designed cargo vehicle is an important part of the International Space Station partnership, enabling humanity to successfully operate its currently only one laboratory and outpost in space. HTV-7 supplied the ISS with a new generation of important payloads such as NASA's Life Science Glove Box LSG, ESA's new Life Support Rack LSR, and the JAXA Small Return Capsule, testing out and demonstrating the new technology of returning critical scientific cargo from the ISS directly into the laboratories of Japanese scientists. We congratulate all purchasing engineers for the successful design and assembly of the small return capsule, and we wish all the best for the upcoming, most interesting phase of the return capsule mission, the reentry and descent. Itziare no imarisho. Arigatou gozaimasu from the International Space Station Expedition 57 crew, and kiwotsukete.
Thanks for those great words, Alex. We're at the 24-hour safe trajectory confirmed. Additionally, yes, 5.2 tons of supplies and science launch, 2 tons of downmass and disposal, the new return capsule, and the unprecedented work to leave the exposed pallet on ISS to support the battery upgrades. It's all been quite a mission. Utsukushi fune, arigatou gozaimashita, soshite sayonara.
So some great words there from the Expedition 57 Commander Alexander Gerst, who was responsible for that release this morning. Congratulating the teams that worked on this mission so far, primarily from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, responsible for building and flying this cargo craft, which is, he said, was packed with over 5 tons of supplies on the way up, and now packed with 2 tons of disposable items on the way back down. So just to recap, successful release this morning at 10:51 a.m. Central Time, 11:51 a.m. Eastern Time. That coming while the station was just 254 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean. The vehicle has executed its departure maneuvers and has moved out of that keep-out sphere, so over 200 meters now away from the space station, and is going to execute a series of burns over the next several days, ultimately re-entering and burning up in the Earth's atmosphere on Saturday, November 10th, with that small re-entry capsule payload being released just before it re-enters, and then making its own way down and splashing down in the Pacific Ocean for an important test of a new capability to return science samples from the International Space Station. With that, though, we'll go ahead and wrap up our coverage of HTV-7's departure. Thanks for tuning in this morning, and as always, follow us online and on social media at nasa.gov/station and all of the various social media accounts to get your latest updates on life on board. We'll be back soon in the next couple of months with a lot of dynamic activity, so be sure to follow along on NASA TV. But for now, we will go ahead and sign off. This is Mission Control Houston.
Okay, everything is fine. I have started the video, so I will start watching the video now. Okay, and Sergey, could you please start the simulator at the same time, because in 3 minutes